And I'm sure that I bet all of us know one person who may have one anxiety disorder or the other, but probably be able to do their day-to-day activities, so we don't see that as a problem. And closely following anxiety issues is depression. And I think depression has now we hear a lot more about depression, and now that we are talking more about mental health, depression has also come up again. We tend to use depression loosely, so we can wake up one day and say that I'm feeling depressed. But being depressed or having depression is more than just waking up one day and not feeling yourself. I mean, there are a lot of things we look out for. So this person may start talking about the fact that they are feeling sad, or they are having this low mood. Then people may start losing interest in the things that they previously enjoyed. So that interest starts going away. We all go our days, rest, and wake up in the morning feeling energized. But this person starts feeling that the energy levels are low. Then they may go on to have things like being worthless, feeling hopeless. They start blaming themselves for what's happening around them. When they're in class, I'm sure you start seeing that they are not concentrating as much as they could do. Then they will start having sleep problems. So either they are finding difficult sleeping, or others are sleeping too much, or you're waking up earlier than your usual time. It's same with appetite. So other people may lose appetite, other people may start eating more than usual. This may be accompanied by changes in weight based on which of the sides you fall with your appetite and all that. Then others may also start having thoughts of suicide. So if life is not worth living, why should I continue living and all that? So people will start having thoughts, and others will go on to attempt it. And unfortunately, some people succeed, and then that will be the time that we even come to our attention that this person had a problem. Yeah, so that's mostly about depression. But that for you to say that someone has depression, it means that that person should have these symptoms over a period of time before you say that this person has depression. So mostly these symptoms, a number of them, we look out for a number of them over a period of at least 2 weeks before you say that person has depression. So that's one other thing. Then we also have the substance use disorders. Mostly, I'm sure a number of people would use one substance or the other. And in this discussion, alcohol is also a substance. But it becomes a problem when it starts affecting your day-to-day activities. You start taking that substance as the main thing in your life as against doing other things in life. You start having complications from it, but you continue using it. At that point, then it becomes a problem. And other people may end up losing their jobs, their relationships, and all that because of the use of substances. And I said it includes alcohol and other ones that usually those are the ones that come to mind when we talk about substances, because we know those ones are illegal. Then we have bipolar disorder. I don't want to have heard it a number of times. Mostly they tend to have the two extremes. So they may have the depression, which we've discussed, similar to what you've discussed. But these people, in addition, may have periods where they are overly happy. So they may be very happy, spending a lot, making appropriate advances. They get angry easily. And they tend to engage in risky behaviors during this period. So they have this distinct period. Some people have very milder forms of this that it's also very difficult to even identify. But you realize that there have been changes in this person's life. They overwork themselves and all that. So those ones are there. Then before we even start thinking about the one that we know we usually ascribe to mental health, that is schizophrenia. Yes. But even those we see on the street, it's just a fraction of them, just one subtype of people with schizophrenia. The thing with schizophrenia is that these people tend to lose touch with reality. So they start having these beliefs that are really not there. And some of them start perceiving things, so they can hear things other people don't hear. They can see things other people don't see. And this may also start manifesting in their behaviors. So these ones are there. And then there are other mental health conditions like those with eating disorders. And then we have the sleeping disorders, we have the personality disorders. So that's like a broad range of mental health issues that we can deal with.
I didn't know sleeping disorders were also part of the mental health issue. But sorry, I'll have to take us back for a bit. It looked like we had a bit of a sound issue in the beginning. So M5, if you don't mind, if you could recap what you said earlier about mental health. There were a couple of points that I've never heard being used to discuss mental health before, like your ability to, deal with your responsibilities, live your life, enjoy yourself, like yourself, all those things. So if you could break down those once again, and in the spectrum that you mentioned as well.
Okay, so when we talk about mental health, it's an idea. It involves your emotional well-being, your psychological well-being. So psychological, how you think, how you cope with issues. What are your coping mechanisms? What are your defense mechanisms? And then it involves your social well-being. So how do you interact with other people? All that comes under mental health, because our relationships are dependent on how we think, first of ourselves, then of others, then our worldview. Okay. And I mentioned that sometimes it's easy to classify people as those who have mental health disorders, those who don't have mental health disorders. But when you look at these 3 areas of social well-being, these are the things that affect how we cope with stresses. So how well are you doing at work? How well are you doing in your relationships? How do you perceive the future, the world? So when you take these 3 areas, you realize that at one point in time, we are all on that spectrum. So mental health, we all have mental health to uphold. So sometimes you may be, most of the time we see the extremes. We see people in crisis. Like Dr. J said, we see people who may be walking around the streets. We see people who may no longer be able to work. But before that, there are stages that sort of, they are caution or they are a sign that could tell that somebody is about to enter into crisis. So even most of us, or a lot of people, may be excelling, they may be doing well at work, they may be thriving, but then you realize that at a point in time, some people, it's like they are now just surviving. It's like, let me do the bare minimum. I'm only able to do the bare minimum. I'm only able to do what is required of me. I can't go the extra mile. I can't think of what else I could do in addition. I just want to make ends meet. It's important that we recognize people at this point to prevent them from going into crisis. Because from surviving, now we come to people who are struggling. And in a church environment, it will be very helpful if we could pick people up at this point. Because now there are outward signs. They may not be attending church as frequently as they used to do. They may be rejecting invitations. They may be canceling plans. They could stop picking up your calls. It may be more difficult to reach them. Even at work, people may not be hitting their deadlines. They may be rude to supervisors. They may be having interpersonal difficulties. All these are symptoms that, okay, so now this person is struggling with their mental health, and we wouldn't want them to get into crisis.
So I think when you mentioned when people are at the point of survivors, where it's like, let me just do the bare minimum that I need to make ends meet or something like that. It makes me think about sometimes the situation that happens at work. You know, I have colleagues, I don't know whether we are all joking or whether we are all serious, that right now the business is not for me, it's not for my mother, it's not for my father. So I'm just here. I'm going to do exactly what I'm supposed to do and be done with it. At what point should there be like a concern raised that? So does that mean that maybe as human beings, the inclination should be to maybe excel rather than do the barest minimum?
Okay, so I do understand where you're coming from, but we also need to understand that some things are part of the normal human experience. Okay. So we all get sad, we all get worried, we all get frustrated. But then now there's a problem when it's persistent. Okay. It's pervasive, meaning that it's not just in one setting. So this doesn't only happen at work. People have issues in church, people have issues at home too. Then now it's impairing your function. So at work, sometimes people may say, look, I'm done with this thing. But when there's a deadline, they step up to it. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, we may complain, but we still find ways to do it. But the problem comes in now, there's a deadline, and I don't really care. There's something that is threatening my job. Okay. And the person seems to be indifferent. This goes on, and it must go on for a period of time. For each one of them, there's a specified amount of time that it should go on. So it's easy to medicalize or make everything a pathology, but that's where you need expert help, because you may think that this person may be suffering a mental disorder. It's easy. You should rather direct them to the right place to get help. Yeah.
So I kind of like your clarification, because for a while I was like, what you've described is really the human experience. And so it's helpful that persistence or pervasiveness is what might... so the question, again, is, seeing as it's part of the human experience, it's obvious to me, at least, that having mental health issues is generally something that we should expect. is it something we can mitigate against? Is it something that we can plan for as human beings?
All right. So, mostly when it comes to mental health and what actually causes it, it's not always one way that you can actually pinpoint one particular thing that causes it. So usually it's a combination of factors that come in. Usually we look at three aspects of it. The first part being that we may have a biological risk. That is, I may probably have a history of one disorder or something. Even that, the fact that I have someone who has been diagnosed with a mental disorder in my family doesn't necessarily mean that I'm also going to get it. But that is one of the risks. Then we also talk about the psychological risk. So this person who probably comes or has someone in the family who has at a risk of developing depression may be fine until maybe goes through a divorce or some psychological stress. Then, so that's the psychological aspect of it. And then you have the social aspect. So this person, maybe two people may be bereaved, but one of them may actually be able to handle it well because they have a lot of social support and everything around, but the other person may not have it. So you have a combination of all these things, all these three things operating together before the person may develop the disorder or not. So sometimes it's very difficult to say that, okay, so I can do this, and then it will prevent me from getting a mental illness or being diagnosed with a mental disorder. But you really cannot tell because there are also people who develop a mental illness and you realize that all the other things you may not find in them. But again, it's a multifactorial thing. It's not one fits all thing. So you have to look at all the other aspects. You may try and work on some of them, like the social support and all that. So for some people, they may check all those boxes, but they will still end up developing the problem along the line. But as much as possible, we work on those that are within our means. Yes, but it's more of the combination and then leading to the person developing or expressing the symptoms of the disorder.
Maybe I'd like to chip in something that sometimes knowing that I can do something about my mental health alone, it's part of the conversation. Knowing that I can protect my mental health, I can take steps, or if I'm going through a stressor, how do I deal with that? That's enough to be able to alter some of the factors that Dr. J mentioned. Because like he mentioned, if you have a genetic predisposition, there's really nothing you can do about it. But you can work on your psychological factors. You can work on the social factors. So that's why I think having these conversations is important. Because sometimes people are not even able to recognize that, okay, so I'm struggling with my mental health. People don't even consider that as a part of their health. So I think we should have these conversations more often. Yeah.
And I think what you just said, I'm beginning to see a bit more of it. I think I tend to spend a bit too much time on social media. And nowadays, people are so intentional about, the kind of boundaries that they set in their lives. Like when it comes to their careers, they will not push themselves past a certain level because they've been able to identify that maybe people even switch careers because they've identified that this path that I'm on is too stressful and it's affecting my social life. And what we've just discussed, we realized that if something's affecting your social life, that can impact on your mental health. So what I'm learning is that like setting boundaries, knowing yourself, knowing your stresses, and being able to set the right boundaries to make sure that, as you said, upholding your mental health is something that you can do to take ownership of it. And I think that's something that's very practical and can be done. And I mean, it's kind of funny because I'll be relating a lot of these things to my job because I think because I think was it last 2 months was mental health awareness month. I said October, and so we had talks. How these things are. We had talks, and then we are always talking about set your boundaries. If you know that you want to turn off your laptop at 5 p.m., let your managers know. And I have my managers messaging me at 7 p.m. 6 p.m. So as much as sometimes you see, as much as you want to take control and ownership of your path, you report to someone. So just sometimes finding that balance is a bit difficult. But I mean, I like to think that it won't get to the point where it becomes too serious. So we've spoken about some of the mental health conditions. Dr. Dan, you broke them down for us. So can we talk a bit about what treatment options are available and just what our options are?
Okay. All right. So just as when I discussed the causes, we looked at the causes, being multifactorial in these three areas,
Yeah.
our treatment options also follow the same pattern. So mostly depending on which condition, and mostly we look at its severity as well and the impact. We also go through the same aspects. So we could have a biological treatment where for some of the conditions the person has to be on medications. Yes, and so it depends on the condition as well. Then for the psychological aspect, they may need some psychotherapy or talk therapy. Depends. That one is also tailored towards the particular condition that the person has. So mostly they are quite specific, and there are more various approaches to it depending on the condition, and then they tend to involve the person as much as possible to make it possible. Then we have the social aspect too. So that's also work at. Mostly we work with the people closer to them, and then there are people around to also work on the social aspect. So mental health is one of the places that it doesn't end when I write medication for you. That is it. It doesn't end there. It's a whole package. You have to make sure that all these aspects are catered for, and then so those are usually the ways we go when it comes to treatment. And mostly they are specific for whichever condition you are dealing with or disorder you are dealing with. Some of them may not need you to be on medications, mainly just therapy, talk therapy, psychotherapy, and the person would be fine. So, that thing also that whenever you're coming to a mental hospital, you're going to get some medication is really the issue. It actually depends on what we are dealing with, yes, at the point.
Do you have any? Okay.
So I have a friend who went through a very traumatic experience. And then after the experience, he noticed that he was not sleeping very well. But to him, he considered it maybe work stress and everything. And he took a mutual friend's mother, who was a psychiatrist, pointing out that based on the experience he's had, he needed to see someone. Now, so this frames up the story of the lack of knowledge that you point out. How can we, help the process of acquiring knowledge? Or apart from these conversations, if I have a friend who approaches me with, how do I see the pointers to say that maybe you need to talk to someone?
Okay, so I do understand. You're asking what can we as friends do? I think you mentioned one, having the conversations is important. That's what we are doing. It's a gradual process. It won't happen overnight. But a good place to start is pray for them. Because I think there are places in our lives that only God can touch. There are deep places in our minds that we even may not know that we are struggling with. I think that's a starter. But then it's also important to start a conversation. In our society, we appear not to be very comfortable with emotions and expressing our emotions. So sometimes when people are very expressive, we see that we tend to view them consciously or unconsciously as attention-seeking, problematic. So people may be struggling, but they have not been brought up in an expressive environment. So you may not be able to say, look, I'm struggling, I'm sad, I feel. So start the conversation. You could start with, I think I've been noticing that you're having a hard time dealing with this. It would have been anybody who went through this experience it's a difficult experience. You need to validate their experiences. If I went through what you went through, I would also be struggling. Okay, just let the person know that there's a reason. It's valid. And an important thing is not to make people their diagnosis. So if a friend tells you that I have been diagnosed with depression, I've been diagnosed with bipolar, now it looks like all that we think about that person is that diagnosis. So somebody with bipolar gets angry. Oh, they are bipolar, they are manic. And we all get angry, you see. So people are not their diagnosis. To help them to seek support. Help them to seek support. So you want to find out, okay, so I'm not equipped to deal with this thing that you are dealing with. Would you like me to look around, ask around? Okay, so if we are going to the hospital, can I go with you? Can I help you to make a folder, to make the process easier for them? It's a lot to deal with if you have a problem. Now you're going to have to go through all these things, walk from here to here, go buy this. So be there, just be there for them. And another thing that I think that we could is to help monitor their progress. Okay, so somebody has been put on medication. Yo, are you taking your medication? How is it going? How are the side effects? Because it's challenging. It's challenging too. And check up on the other aspects of the person's. How is work going? How is family going? How are you dealing with it? And don't also forget, boundaries are also important for you so that you also don't get burnt out. Because sometimes out of sympathy, empathy, we take on the entire burden of this friend's illness. And now you want to do everything for them. But the goal is to help them stand on their feet again, not to enable them to stay there. So these are some of the ways. And I think don't take things too personally. So if you're calling someone and consistently the person is not picking up, okay, sometimes you can get offended. You're texting, they are not responding. You give them invitations, they are rejecting it. Don't take it too personally. The person is going through something. So pick up the relationship from there. Leave the invitations open. Or if you want to come, you can come. Because sometimes even them cancelling plans is a source of guilt for them. So now even when they see they are avoiding you, so don't take it too. It's not about you. They are dealing with something. I think if anything comes up, I will add on.
And also just to add, I mean, if you find someone who needs help, I mean, you know MFI, or you know someone in the hospital, like, oh, I know this person, I'll talk to this person, or go and see that person. It even makes that person feel more comfortable because, oh, and this is someone I know, this is someone you trust, that person I can talk to, and it makes it easier for them. But there are a few times that the people going through the problem may also not recognize it. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling down, that I can tell. That I am feeling it, I can tell.
Yeah.
But if I come and tell you that I'm hearing something that you don't hear, then it becomes more difficult. So then the other thing is that person is experiencing something that you are not experiencing. I mean, you wouldn't be experiencing. Sometimes we tend to even challenge them. So you try to talk, oh, why do you say you are doing this? Or why are you saying this? So that's another thing we have to look at. For some of those ones, it's difficult for them to realize that whatever is going on is unusual because that person actually, that's what they are feeling. And so sometimes those ones becomes more difficult, and getting them to even get help becomes a bit more difficult. You may end up having to involve their family or other people to get them to get help. Okay, so that's another aspect that we also have to look at as well.
Okay. Oh, there was something you mentioned that I wanted to. Okay, well, it's part of what we are talking about, like being there for your friends, checking up on them and all that. And also, I think because of what you've said about us in general, not necessarily being too expressive, talking about like our emotions and things, sometimes you don't want to come off as, prying, or how do you let your friend understand that you are not just, you don't just want to be in their business, but like you really genuinely have their interest at heart? What are some of the ways you can?
Okay, so there's a way of listening. So there are active listening, okay? So you're asking open-ended questions. You're asking, is there something you would like to talk to me about? And a lot of times, people actually want to talk, but they don't want to initiate the conversation. So provide a safe space for them to be able to do that. Let them know that you're there. You're there. So once in a while, you send a message. They don't reply. I mean, you still send a message. You still see them. Okay, so I sent you a message. They're like, I mean, you don't. Wait, why didn't you respond to my message? Like, no, I mean, you pick it up from where you left it. Just make the person know that there's someone that they can talk to if they need to, and you also shouldn't pry. I mean, some questions are really, really personal, and if somebody wants to open up to you, people are protective of their space and their business, and sometimes people are afraid of being stigmatized. For instance, in church. So if I'm trying to think, so let's say you have a child or a teen who is going through abuse and the abuser is in the church, it stands to reason that it will be a struggle for them to be able to open up to you until they can trust you. So you need to win their trust. You need to let them know that there's a group of people that is available for you. And also, it helps sometimes to spread the responsibility over a group. Otherwise, it gets too much for one person. So if we are in a youth group, I checked on her today, you can check on her tomorrow, you can check on her the day after. Then she knows that there's a safety net and you are also not getting burnt out. And it helps to also read about their conditions. So, for instance, if somebody has been diagnosed with depression and you want to help the person, you really don't know what, then every time that you're speaking to the person has to explain to you what they are going through. It gets frustrating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we should also read. Let's know what people are going through. There's a lot of resources available. Sometimes I think we just have to go out of our way and be intentional about helping people.
Can you go into some of the resources?
Okay, so now there's this new initiative. There's Mind It. It's a Ghanaian. Yeah, Mind It is a very good one. Short code *713*66#. Okay. So it's a mental health helpline. Just mental health issues. If you're afraid, you think that somebody is suicidal, you could call. Somebody is going through depression, you could call. If you yourself are going through it, you could call and they'll direct you. They can help. They can link you to community psychiatry as well, and so that's very helpful. But a lot of the psychiatric hospitals, almost all are actually walk-in. You don't necessarily need a referral to be able to visit that hospital. So you could walk into Accra Psychiatric, you could walk into Pantan, and nobody will turn you away at any point. Okay, so that's an option.
I think even some private hospitals also have clinics like that, so you can actually book an appointment. I know in Yahoo, for instance, Holy Trinity also has a place like that. And most of our district hospitals even have psychiatric units attached to them. So you can actually go through the general hospital, and if you think that you need to see them, they'll start the process from there. And then if you need to be referred to any of the other the psychiatric hospitals, you could. Kolibo also has a psychiatric unit attached to it. So that's another option that to use if you need to.
Okay, thanks for that. And you mentioned a bit about stigma, people not wanting to be stigmatized. Can you maybe just break that down a bit? What you've seen, the kind of stigma that you see maybe some of your patients go through that might keep them from coming back for treatment, or even maybe some stuff that you've heard as mental health professionals from people who don't really know about mental health, maybe misconceptions that may make it difficult for people with mental health issues to come forward.
That's endless. But let's start from stigma. There can be self-stigma, and then there can be from other people. So let's say someone has a relapse in a public space, let's say at work.
Okay.
The person perceives that, okay, so now everybody saw what I went through, and now it's difficult for the person to come back into the same space. Then there can be, and even healthcare workers who work in mental health can also be stigmatized. There's that popular notion that you become like your patients. I'm sure you've heard that before.
I really haven't.
Oh, really?
No.
You have? Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, people feel like, patients stigmatize themselves because they feel like, so why do I have to be the one going through this? Why did I have to have a relapse in this way? So when someone is not taking their medication, they have a relapse, then they start blaming themselves. So I caused the relapse. Out of all my siblings, why am I the only one who is struggling with this? And people stigmatize what they don't understand a lot. So if we're in a community where mental literacy is not high, it stands to reason that there will be stigmatization. And also because there's a stereotype. Once people hear mental health, they start thinking about somebody who has tied cloth in their hair and is walking around. Yeah, so there's that stereotype. But the more you interact with actual, like, people who have mental health issues, then you realize that it's not like that at all. I mean, so let me, maybe on the lighter side. So I ordered something. I needed a delivery to the Accra Psych Hospital. And the delivery man raised the price by almost half the price. So I asked why. He said, hey, no, I'm coming to the mental hospital. Like, it's a risk allowance. And I just thought to myself, so in his mind, he's thinking that in the hospital, like, there are people walking around, running amok, beating people. So there's that stereotype. But the more we interact with people, and you'd be surprised to know that there are a lot of people who are actually seeking treatment, more than we know around us. But they don't speak up. So we don't realize that people with mental health issues can go to work. They can function as usual. So we keep that stereotype. So the more we have these conversations, the more people come out. There's a lot going on in that space. There are a lot more people who are actually coming out is, I think that's what helped the Western society, because a lot more popular people were coming out to say that I have bipolar, I'm suffering from depression. Then that stigma starts reducing. So little by little, we see it happening here. Yeah.
I was even about to mention that, when you watch our local movies, for instance, I see how that stereotype is depicted and projected. I mean, and sometimes it's given religious connotations and all that wrappings and presentation. So, again, I can see how it's a struggle. Like somebody is going through these experiences, those barriers exist for them to even seek specialist help. But for me, I mean, again, we're a community of young people here, and it's really about noticing the people who are struggling. Are there any, even how we converse with them? Do you have any pointers for us? How do we frame our language? How do we frame the conversations? How do we encourage people to talk with maybe the executives or something if they are going through these challenges?
All right, so I think, as you rightly said, it starts from the barriers to care, and usually start from the misconceptions. So if we start thinking that there's some spiritual force behind it, first of all, I wouldn't want to seek help. Another thing is that people are worried about the stigmas MFA rightly spoke about, and it actually goes beyond the community, even to workplaces and all that. That if I'm going to, if I go out to get help and anybody gets to hear that I've been to the psychiatric hospital, that is it's my workplace, I'm going to have issues and all that. But again, when we have to encounter people who have mental health issues, we sometimes become too careful dealing with them. So I'm careful not to say this around this person because of this or that. But really, they are just like all of us. If I don't tell you that maybe I've been diagnosed with this or I've been diagnosed with that, you wouldn't be able to tell if you met me for a conversation. But if I tell you about it, then you start behaving in an unusual way. Yes, like I'm careful, like, oh no, don't let this person do this. Even when the person has to do something in church, we are all careful about it. And sometimes the other thing we have to look at is the kind of language you use around them. It doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them, but the kind of language, some of our languages are stigmatizing in the first place. We describe people by their illness to start with, and we tend to use words. So sometimes they don't feel very comfortable if you use the stigmatizing words. Typical, one of them is the way we use mad around and all that. It doesn't feel very comfortable and all that. It really sounds very mean to call. Yes, but again, also doesn't mean that person cannot take part in the regular things. As much as possible, we should involve them in their day-to-day activities. The fact that I've been diagnosed with a mental illness doesn't mean that if I was singing in a church, I can't do that again. I'm in the prayer band, I can't do that again. They can be able to go about and do their day-to-day things. So sometimes these restrictions also tend to have a negative toll on them and rather leads them to relapsing and all that. So as much as we can encourage them, if they are willing to talk about it, sometimes they don't really want to talk about it, like, okay, I'm fine. That's fine. You don't force them to talk about it. But once they come up, it doesn't mean you should also cut them off. Let's encourage them. I mean, if they want to do something, of course, you let them go ahead and do it. And then I'm sure one of the things that people wouldn't want to talk about is the fact that if I talk to you the next moment, and everybody in the congregation knows about me. And it's difficult, especially when it's mental health. Even I had another medical condition like asthma or something, I don't mind if the next person knows. But if you talk about the mental health issue and other people get to know, it's a problem. So yes, we may pick up the signs as much as possible. Let's also respect that person's confidentiality. Once they have come up to us that they have any challenge, let's be supportive. Let's encourage them to do what they do normally. Let's not cut them off from certain things because we think you have this problem, you have that problem. And I think we may also be working with them in the workplace. And let's also be careful what we do to them and how we see them around the workplace. Because some workplaces are very supportive. Others too, that'll be your end. You never see your promotion again. That is it. So those are things that we have to look out for.
I also wanted to bring up something else. I mean, there's also this other mindset that people tend to use things like mental health as a way to check out. I mean, they I'm not pulling my weight. Oh, mental health. Now, I say it's a mindset because sometimes it undermines the genuine, like somebody is genuinely going through an experience, but because we tend to victimize the victim, at least that's what I tend to observe about our society, then the first thing is to dismiss and say, Masa, you're just a lazy person who wants to get away with it, and because mental health is the new baby on the block.
The new craze.
So how do we face this? First of all, is there some substance to it? And secondly, how do we go past it as a community so that it doesn't also become our mindset?
This is a very tricky, muddy area. Tread cautiously. Anything you say can be used against you. But I do understand where you're coming from. But some of these things are human behavior. So somebody may be inclined to take advantage of situations, and that person goes on to develop a mental health condition. So, I mean, this was the person before the person developed the mental. So, yes, the person can be using the mental health condition as a way out of responsibility. And you're right, because then it makes it difficult for us to give grace to the people who actually need the grace. We need a lot of discernment in that situation, because really, for instance, somebody struggling with depression may need some days off from work, off the books. Somebody may have depression, but may not be in a depressive episode, but will use that as an excuse to get to. So really, it's neither here nor there. We still need to keep at the back of our minds that there are genuine people who need extra support and extra grace. And it's interesting, like now, especially with, I don't want to say the youth, but I'm bipolar. I have anorexia. Like, and a lot of these people are self-diagnosing. Okay, so they go onto the internet and I think I checked the boxes, and then it's okay. So I think I have ADHD.
that one, the OCD.
Yeah, OCD.
Like the two most popular
Yeah.
ones I've been
So
seeing.
someone is washing their hands. Oh no, me, I have OCD. So trivializing diagnosis like that also makes it more difficult for us to give it the importance that it requires. So you don't self-diagnose. Go to someone who's an expert. If you think you have a problem, get a diagnosis so that we know that, okay, so this is the problem. I don't know if Dr. J has anything else to add.
I mean, just to add a bit. So yes, it's true that we have people do that. Even in the legal system, you have people coming up when they are caught up in trouble and all that. So it's a difficult situation. Sometimes you really have to do detailed assessment to find out that the person really has or he doesn't have. But it doesn't mean that the person who also has the condition should be punished because another person is misusing it. So I think for us, before you even write the person off, you can actually, especially if it's a workplace or something, you can ask the person to get a professional assessment. They can get an opinion on that before you take a decision, because then the person really may also be going through another problem. Maybe, yes, self-diagnose the wrong thing, but really may have another challenge. The other thing is that the person may have a challenge, but it may not directly be responsible for what the person is trying to avoid. So, I mean, anytime you are in doubt or you are concerned, you can actually ask the person to talk to a professional. Then it gives a much clearer picture than, so that you also don't punish people, who don't deserve it.
Someone asked the question. I think, in fact, you kind of addressed this a little earlier, but I'll just still put it out there. She says, how can you help someone who does not want to be helped? I.e., they do not want to admit that they have a mental illness.
Okay, so let's start from they do not want to admit that they have a mental illness. As in, are you diagnosing the person the person has been diagnosed, so that's an issue. I mean, is there a diagnosis? Do you think the person has a mental illness? Two things. I think Dr. J sort of mentioned it. Okay, that was earlier. That at the point where the person is a threat to themselves or to other people, confidentiality is not the priority. Health and safety and life is the priority. So if you have someone who is slashing their wrist, or someone who is overdosing, and this and this person says don't seek help, I don't think that the prudent thing to do would be to cover it up, okay? Because in this scenario, life supersedes anything else. But then also, it's people have autonomy. Okay, so people have a right to choose whether or not to seek help or treatment. You are not responsible for someone else's choices. You are responsible for you have to be a support. That's your role. You are not taking over the person's life and making the person's decisions for them. We are trying to get the person to the point where they see what we are also seeing, and then we are taking a decision that benefits the person altogether. So let's keep these things in mind. Threats to self, threats to others. So if somebody is constantly talking to you about, I'm going to kill this person, I'm going to beat this person deserves death, you wouldn't want to hear that. Yeah, these are red flags that, yes. So you do need to report. I mean, call the helpline, seek help from someone. There are a lot of people in the church, yeah.
So I was just about to talk about the autonomy part. I mean, it makes, on the one side, if it's a friend, but a parent. I mean, and I have young children, but I'm a parent, and I'm wondering, like, if my child is going through an experience, I don't see myself sitting there and just watching them go through that. What advice do you have for parents and
maybe
upcoming
before Dr. Ajay says, I mean, they're minors, and minors don't necessarily have autonomy. Yes, so that's different. But sometimes the case is different when it's, let's say, an older parent. So if I'm an adult and I have a parent who has dementia and my parent is refused, so these are some of the muddy issues. But I think Dr. Ajay.
So I think she brought up some of the points earlier. So yes, I mean, if they are minors, of course, you have some oversight and you have some control over them until they are 18. But if this person could be more than 18 years, has a problem, you start by talking to the person. And actually rightly said, at any point you think that this person, if he started locking himself in the room, he wouldn't come out to eat for 5 days, he hasn't eaten. You don't say that person has autonomy, because if you leave him, his situation may deteriorate and he may end up losing the life. So at that point, that one doesn't hold, and you're actually backed by the mental act to get that person the needed care that they need. So in as much as it may be difficult initially, you try to have a conversation with them, try to get other people who are closer to them to encourage them to get help. Then if not, and you realize that the condition is deteriorating, this person is going downhill, is becoming a threat to himself or the other person, you still go ahead. And then you may need to force that person to get help. I mean, I have to use force here because you can't allow the person harm themselves. So yes, that one still holds.
Okay, thank you. Someone is also asking, how can we deal with loneliness? Someone who may have suffered a breakup or a loss of a family member.
Okay, so we are social beings, and very little can take that away. In the wave of now, there's a lot of self-love and a lot of self-care, and we need to be careful not to take it to the extreme. We do need people. We need people to validate our experiences. We need people to share our experience, our joys, our sorrows. Loneliness, I think, especially after COVID, a lot of people struggle with loneliness. You need to seek help. You need to take a step. Okay. Sometimes it's difficult to get into a group that seems to already be formed, but you need to put yourself out there. You can't always wait for people to come to you. You also need to reach out. Okay. And I saw a definition of social support. So it says that if you have 5 people in your network who can validate your experiences, say to you that you did good, you were working hard for this promotion, you got it, that's great. Somebody who can stand in for you. It may be in trivial ways. So maybe, let's say they are sharing popcorn in church and you are downstairs. Somebody who can say, oh, my friend is downstairs, let me pick it up. Yeah, like that's social support. Or I need an unexpected deadline. Charlie, can you help me pick my child up? That's social support. So in as much as we expect it, let's intentionally build communities like this. We have to be deliberate about it. This person is not around. I need to check on the person. And it's not just family. I think for a lot of people who come from extended or large families, it sort of comes naturally to them. Yeah, but for some people, it may not come as naturally to them. So we have to go out of our way to deliberately cultivate those kinds of relationships. Yes.
And just to add a little, I mean, for someone who has lost a loved one, yes, there's a lot of social support, but you realize that mostly that social support exists maybe in the initial phases, the first few days, after the funeral, that everybody leaves you, so you are left on your own. I mean, sometimes you actually may need some professional help, some additional support to go through it. Yes, it's expected that losing a loved one, you still have to go through grief. But for some people, they may need that extra support from a professional. So the friends will be there. That one, they will be there. You'll get calls or visits. But after some time...
the boxes of water.
Of course, they'll come and visit and see. But after those periods, and mostly that's why it hits the most. Yeah. When everything is done, everybody leaves, and you're left on your...
quiet.
Yes, and you now struggling to cope. So if it gets to that point and you need professional help, it doesn't hurt to get to talk to one. You can talk to a psychologist. That may be helpful at that point. That may be all that you need. You don't necessarily have to be put on medications or anything. You may just need that support for that period to help you go through. So we shouldn't also be afraid to get professional help during those periods, or encourage people to get those supports.
Okay, just quickly to, even when we are managing diagnosed depression, for instance, there are things that make it easier. So exercise. I mean, let's just even leave it at it's not diagnosed, but you're struggling with loneliness. You can exercise. It's been proven that there are endorphins that are released. Okay, so you want to create a routine for yourself. You can eat healthy. You can get a hobby, a shared hobby. Look for a support group. So these are some of the lifestyle modifications that make it easier to deal with loneliness. Because sometimes there are situations in which really, for instance, if you relocate, if you move out of Ghana and you go to Sweden and you don't know anybody there, it's cold, it's dark. Okay, so these are some of, you need to get out. You need to actively work on your mental health and don't just wait for it to be handed to you.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say something. Yes. I think maybe another thing too is, which may seem like a misconception, is people kind of downplay how much some of these losses can impact an individual. So maybe in a group of friends, because we talked about how to be careful when you're talking to people who may be going through mental health issues. Everybody has lost somebody before, so how come you alone? Are you the only one who has gone through a breakup? But I've gone through a breakup, and this is how it's affecting me. So I need I need medical, professional help. And I think when we try and disabuse our minds of the fact that, okay, if A was able to process it on their own, does not necessarily mean that the next person can. And so we should let them have that safety or that freedom to seek the kind of help that they need.
I think when MFA was talking, and he actually mentioned the fact that as part of being mentally healthy, we should be able to cope with the stresses of life. And she actually also added that it's a spectrum. So your way of coping with stress may be different from mine. So what you may see as trivial may really mean a lot to me. So you don't say that we've all lost someone, so you should just get used to it. It doesn't work like that. We're all different people.
And I just wanted to add, like, one takeaway. You use the word validating the other person's experiences. Because, I mean, like you said, it's like, but are you the only one who has? I mean, look, then just to invalidate, I'll start telling my story. Me, that I lost 5 people cry. I didn't cry, so I don't see why you have lost one. And I think that's a very good takeaway, that we don't invalidate the other person's experiences by overshadowing them with anyway.
And also sometimes we think we have coped with things, but in actual fact, we really haven't coped. So you may see somebody who is back in church, back serving after they lose a parent. And for all you know, they are just suppressing it, or they are it's repressed. Okay, so a loss is a loss, and a loss has to be dealt with. Yes, irrespective of how you deal with it, a loss has to be dealt with.
And okay, so clarification has come on the how can you help somebody who does not want to be helped. So in the situation, the person has been diagnosed, but they are refusing to take their medication.
It's a tricky one. So, I mean, it all boils down to, I think that's why the person used the fact that the person's failing to accept.
Yeah.
And it's one of the big issues in mental health. Mainly because, as I earlier said, if I am feeling sad and I'm feeling down and all that, I can appreciate it. But if it gets to the point where I am hearing something or I believe, and I'm hearing it, and you don't think it's true, so you say I'm unwell, and that I have to take medication, then I'm less likely to take the medication because I still feel that I don't have a problem. So it becomes a challenge, and it really requires a lot of effort. Yes, you can only encourage the person as much, but you still look out for the person. The fact that the person is also not maybe going by the treatment that they are supposed to be on doesn't mean that, okay, so if you're not ready to help yourself, I'm done with you. No, you can still have to support that person. I mean, if a person probably gets an acute crisis, you may still be the other person closer to them because it's difficult for them to accept it. If I have malaria and I'm having headaches and all that, nobody will tell me to take the medications. But this one, sometimes, and again, for some of the conditions, even when I'm fine, I'm expected to continue taking my medications. And so it becomes another issue. So why should I continue taking my medication even when I'm well? But some of the conditions require that even when you are well, you take it. So it sometimes is also quite difficult for those who have a condition. And so sometimes they find it difficult to accept the treatment. But the least you can do is to still support the person, encourage the person. When they come to us, we also try as much as possible to try and explain to them why they need to be on the treatment. But beyond that, really you can't do a lot more, like go force the person to take the medication. If you give me medication, I put it under my tongue and I never take it. In your mind, I'm taking it. But we also tend to sometimes use other forms of medication, depending on the condition anyway, so that we can go around some of these problems. But you just have to be there for that person. At least, if the person is not taking the medication, provide the other support that we spoke about, the social support, and then the psychological support as well.
Okay, just to chip in, towards the end, Dr. Eji mentioned some alternatives. Okay, so sometimes you need to explore why don't you want to take your medication. For some people, it's the side effects, and you may have to probe. Sometimes they don't even recognize themselves that, okay, so this medication makes me drowsy, so when I go to work, I'm not able to concentrate. I take frequent breaks. For some people, it's the weight gain. Okay, and they may not be able to tell a prescriber, but they can tell you, and then you can go with them and speak to the prescriber. And if the medication can be switched, if it can be adjusted, if we can introduce other options of medication, that's also helpful. Okay,
thanks. That's very helpful. And someone's also asking if we can touch on autism and Asperger's.
So I think Asperger's is still in the spectrum of the autism spectrum disorder. So mostly those are childhood, developmental disorders. The main issue is that they have issues with their social interaction. So their communication and social interactions are affected in these children. So mostly, even when I'm smiling at you, the person does not recognize it. They wouldn't want to play with other children. They don't use a lot of this non-verbal communication, even sign language. You know, when we do things, you expect that person to understand. But they usually tend to have challenges with those as well. And aside that, they tend to also have this restricted interest, and it can have this repetitive behavior. So if it's an interest in this moving object, they can actually be sitting there and looking
Engaged
at them.
in it for hours.
Yes, or they have some rituals that they perform and all that. So it's one of the other neurodevelopmental disorders that we face. Mostly, it's not one of those that when it happens, I give you medication and it goes. So it's more of therapy. So we have behavioral therapy, both for one that involves the child and also the one that involves the parent. Because the parents even have their own skills training. We also teach the children also some forms, because sometimes the aim is to get them to be able to do certain things or apply certain skills that would help them. But you also need to involve the parents as well, because they are the primary carers. And if you have, the Asperger's is the extreme. They are very high functioning, but you still see that they have some deficits in their communication and all that. But you can have those also on the other extreme. Some of them are not even verbal, they're not able to communicate and all that. So that one is more of psychological and social support. Sometimes if they have certain challenging behaviors, we tend to use other forms of treatment like medications as well to help them.
Trying to see if we have another question. I think, yes. So someone's asking, if someone is watching online now and needs help, how can we assist them? So you've mentioned some of the things already, like the social support and all that. So maybe if you can just give a recap of that. And also the facilities that are available and the short code. I wanted to put it in the chat, so if you can tell us that one now.
Okay, so the minded, first of all, like Dr. J mentioned, there's psych units attached to a lot of the big hospitals. So the regional hospitals, LECMA, you should be able to get. Tema General has one. Ridge should be able to direct, but Ridge is close to Accra Psych, so you should be able to go there. Even outside Accra, there are community psychiatric units. Okay, so that's an option. And then there's the short code for Minded Ghana. That's star 713 star 66 hash. Okay. Star 713 star 66 and then a hash. Okay, so you can call, and then it's a call center. They are equipped to help you. Okay, and you can always walk into Accra Psychiatric, and especially in the church, we are open to help. So, Nanesi has our numbers. Pucha has our numbers.
I do.
Yeah.
I do have your numbers. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Can we talk about therapy in general, like talking therapy in general? Because I was first exposed to it like on TV, where you saw people who have weekly standing appointments with their therapists, and they're going there and talking about stuff. So, are there certain triggers that maybe you need to have before you know that, okay, maybe I need therapy, or can anyone just go for therapy? Should there be like specific reasons why you want to go for therapy, or maybe you think that, okay, I've grown up, I need therapy? Like, can we talk about that?
And by extension as well, I mean, what would you say to somebody who feels like, I'm a Christian, my community and my belief and my Christ has died for me should mean that I don't need therapy? What's your message to people like that?
Okay. I think we'll all have something to say because it's a very big. But first of all, therapy is both prescribed and then you can opt for therapy. So if someone comes to see a mental health professional, you feel like, okay, so this person, so there are different forms of therapy, okay? Typically, what we see is psychoanalysis, from TV, from a lot of the depictions. So the person is saying, okay, so tell me about your childhood experiences. And then, okay, so I had a traumatic childhood experience. Okay, so then this may be the reason why you are showing restraints in your relationship. So that's psychoanalysis. But there are different forms of this behavior modification. So depending on your diagnosis, and then we prescribe a particular form of therapy. But I'm also inclined to believe that for someone to say that I need therapy, they probably do need, there's probably something that they want to talk about. Okay, so you can't also put a barrier to that person seeking help by saying that you need to go through. And for many psychologists, when they interact with you and they realize that, okay, this is beyond psychology, you need medical treatment, they refer to psychiatrists. Okay, so it's a growing body of professionals. Okay, when it comes to the issue of Christianity, I am let me put it this way. Yes, I have two perspectives. I think that the more involved I get in mental health, the more I do see that there are a lot of answers in the Bible and there are a lot of answers in the church. But that's not to say the answers are only in the church and the answers are only in scripture, because God created all of us and he gives answers to people who need it, who may not necessarily be in the church. So doesn't mean that if somebody doesn't actively come to church, that person cannot deal with depression. And you tend to get better at what you repeatedly do. Okay, so if I'm a church member and I haven't been trained to take somebody through psychotherapy, through depression, I may miss the cues of, for instance, suicidality. And that's more of a problem than if you had just directed a person to someone who sees people with depression on a daily basis, and the person is able to identify that, okay, so this person needs help. There's a tagline, Jackie Hill Perry, she says Jesus and therapy, and I think that's a good combination. Okay, so we come to Jesus like I said earlier, there are parts of us that only he knows, and there are parts of our trauma that we may not even be able to express, but he's able to resolve. And at the same time, we are human beings and we need human interaction. So that's where therapy comes in. Okay, so I don't think the two are mutually exclusive as we make it seem. Okay, if I also say that, so does it mean that you wouldn't seek any secular, I mean, then the road that you are driving on, who constructed the road? Yeah, like, no, so, okay, so it was an atheist road contractor, so I would use another street. It was an atheist painter, so I mean, there are lines to it. Okay, so that maybe Dr. J.
So I think I will start from the therapy aspects. As she mentioned one thing, that sometimes you can go to the psychologist and eventually refer you back to the psychiatrist. I think one of the challenges we face, one of the things people do is that they would rather not want to hear that I'm going to see a psychiatrist. I would rather want to go and see a psychologist because that sounds a bit milder.
So can you break down the difference?
Okay, so I mean, psychiatry deals with diagnosis, management, prevention, but we also tend to use a lot of do the medication aspects as well. Whereas for psychology, it's mainly about the talk therapy, the psychotherapy, and all that. It's really not a problem if you have to go through a psychiatrist and after that they say, okay, so this one is mainly in the realms of the clinical psychologist, so I'm referring you to the psychologist. It shouldn't be a problem at all. And so it shouldn't be that if they say see the psychiatrist, like, no, I mean, one time they mention the psychiatrist, that is it. So, I mean, it's one of the other points I wanted to bring up. Then about religion and Christianity, I think she mentioned a lot. But again, you see, we say that, but I'm sure when we have a headache or something, we go and buy medications. So sometimes only because it's mental health that we tend to say that, okay, so once I'm a Christian, so that aspect is very important because it's known that even belonging to that group, joining church service, also a big support system. Remember when we were talking about the management, we talked about the social support and all that. For someone, he or she may be getting that support from the church group and all that. So that is the church or your faith is really a good party in your healing process. But it doesn't mean that we should also throw away the medical aspect. So in as much as I'll get treatment for malaria, or I'll get treatment for my hypertension, I shouldn't have a problem getting treatment for my mental health condition because I'm a Christian. We knew we're Christians and we still got the additional treatment to help us through that. So we can still combine the two to make it easier. And there are some churches that would even, when you talk to someone, he says, oh, okay, I think this one will do our part, but you can still talk to the professional. It becomes a problem when people get chained and prayer comes. Then it's a big problem because then you're actually violating the person's human rights as well. So it's another aspect.
It's funny you mentioned that because while I was doing the reading, I came across an article about that where I've forgotten, somebody who came from UN or something like that wanted to speak to some of these prayer camp leaders, and the whole human rights aspect came inside where because you are trying to operate by faith, they are not allowed to seek medical help. So thanks for mentioning that.
Let me just add this. It's important for people leading in the church to be mentally literate, to know a lot about mental health, because invariably they are the first port of call anyway. A lot of people speak to their pastors, their youth leaders, their group leaders before they even speak to anyone else. So it's important that we educate ourselves on some of the common ways in which mental health conditions present.
Is it possible to be healed from these mental health conditions, or is it something that people would have to manage for the rest of their lives? Something like depression and anxiety and all that. Is it something that you're going to have to manage forever, or one day can somebody maybe as part of their routine checks with their doctor, the doctor will tell them, do you know what? Considering everything that has gone on, I think you are no longer suffering from depression or anxiety.
Okay, so just as with the physical illnesses, there are some illnesses that are curable, and there are some that we can only manage. So if somebody has malaria, you go through the course of malaria, we can test again, and there are no MPs, and then we say that, okay, so we are done. But if somebody has hypertension, you can't cure hypertension, and the damage is done as your blood pressure is persistently elevated. So you would want to be on antihypertensives. That's the same way even with the mental health conditions. There are those that are manageable. We can't cure them. For instance, schizophrenia, we can't cure them. There are some that, and a lot of the mental health conditions are long-term conditions, so we manage over a long period of time. But that decision to stop management has to be taken in consultation with an expert, okay? Because so when you have a diagnosis made, you have reviews. We are following up to find out how are you doing? Are you getting better with treatment? If you are getting better, it's over long periods of time, okay? So it's not, yes, somebody may have been treated for depression in the past, but there are guidelines, there are standard guidelines, worldwide guidelines as to when to stop medication, because there are many incidences of people stopping medication abruptly, getting relapses, and sometimes even the medication itself is not meant to be stopped abruptly. You can have side effects of stopping the medication. So these are some of the issues.
She addressed most of them. So as she rightly said, it varies from condition to condition. Some of them you can actually decide that. And there was one thing in mental health that once that's happened, it can happen again. So someone may have a depressive episode, may be fine sometimes for years until they get the other one. So as she rightly said, there's a guideline. So maybe after the first episode, after some time, you'll be able to take that person off. But you have that discussion with the person. So when we start seeing this, you may have to go back on medications again. The others that would also advise, okay, so let's stay on it in the long term. We may rather reduce the dose over time. And there's some that will say, okay, so this one, after this course, we'll just observe and see how things go. So those they are, depending on the particular condition, we usually try to work with the person, the patient, so that they also feel part of it and they own it. And because sometimes, for some of the conditions, when they start experiencing, they themselves will even come back to you and say, like, I've started feeling this way, that would you think there's a problem or not? So that's another aspect we have to look at.
Cool. I think there are no more questions. I'm done with my points. I don't know, Pocho, if you have any other.
I mean, as finally, as a way of speaking to us as a community, I know you've made a lot of pointers, and it says that, well, young people, we are more open to talking about this. What kind of attitudes should we have in place that helps us to create a community that is mental health friendly? So by that I mean that it's a space where people get to have their mental health at a thriving stage. Like, everybody is encouraged to be working at their optimum. And if they are going down, we are able to identify them and provide the right support. What kind of attitudes are we to develop as a fellowship, as young people, and live with?
All right. So knowledge is, I think, would start with knowledge. Knowing that this can happen to people. Don't like to hear that this can happen to anybody, but in reality, this can happen to anybody. Building an accepting community, okay? A lot of people are comfortable with people that are, in quotes, normal. They don't like things that deviate from normality. Yes, what is normal?
Outliers.
That's a very good. People don't like outliers. But society is not made up of just average people, okay? So we need to be aware that there are people who have different experiences from ours, and it's okay for them. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to have a different life experience. It's okay for you to be struggling with something that I'm not struggling with. And I'm willing to learn, even though I may not have had anybody who had a mental health issue, but I'm willing to learn to be there for you. So that's an accepting community, and a community that has the knowledge and the skill. So we all build on our skill. We all read. So you hear that, okay, so this person has bipolar. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to learn, what can I do to help this person? What else? Is there anything else that, Doctor?
So I think one other thing we can also do is to be there for each other. We should have support systems. I mean, we probably have groups that you can talk amongst yourself and you can easily check on each other if there's anything. I think another thing is that people usually don't like coming up talking to people. So if you can also have channels where I can actually get through a professional without having to deal directly with this person. So that person can put in a request anonymously, has to talk to the person, so you don't even know what it is. Then it's also a very good thing, because people wouldn't want to talk to just anyone. So if they can have those channels where if I need maybe some psychological support, or you can send a request to this, a number will be sent to you and you can call this person and you can follow up. That's also much easier for people to, so that they wouldn't have to come and talk to you or come and talk to this executive, because I'm afraid that when I talk to you, it would go out. So those are also going to be helpful for a community or for the church.
We've got another question. If you have a lot of dreams or nightmares, could that be associated with mental health problems?
Well, so it depends. So there's nightmare. There's nightmare as part of the sleep disorders. One of the scene. Again, one of the things we talk about in mental health is that it has to be persistent, disruptive, and all that. So yes, if it's really bothering the person, we can really assess, because nightmare is actually one of the sleep disorders we talk about. So we can look at that as well.
Okay, thank you. So if you have a lot of dreams and nightmares, you can seek help. If it's persistent and destructive to your life. Okay. It doesn't bother the person, but it's persistent.
It's persistent. Yes. No, the person we can still have a conversation about it.
Yeah, so gentle reminder, a lot of the psych places are working, so take advantage of that. I think we've learned a lot about the research. I didn't know that all this was there, especially with each district and region having a psych unit. I think that information is good to have.
I personally think I had a very interesting experience some 2 years ago. Something happened in our house. We got robbed, and I had a very advanced sense of security about where we're staying. And so when the robbery happened, it
shook your reality.
Shook my reality. And I didn't know it. I didn't know it then. But for the next couple of months, I was very in a state of I didn't feel like working. I wasn't very communicative. And a lot of things, the world just felt bland and fortunately, partly community, friends, but also resources, and I was reading more, and I found a way to encourage myself and then see the reality of, which means also putting new security measures. But now I look back and I saw that, yes, I was going through a depressive experience, and I sort of didn't even know to even try and seek help. So other things kicked in, the social support and everything. But if those hadn't, I could have seen myself going for a very long time without dealing with the issue. So it helps that now I know these things. So next time I see it happening, I know to look out for it.
Okay, thank you. Do you guys have any closing remarks for us?
Just to add that, I think when we spoke about this, we usually spoke about the youth and all that, but we should also know that mental health is not really related to the young people. So it goes through all the ages. So from childhood right there to the adults. So they also have their own ranges of disorders that can affect them. So we shouldn't overlook those ones as well, because clearly it's known that about 50% of the mental health problems start before age 14. So that's quite significant. So it goes through all the age. Yes, the conditions you see at the various stages may be different, but we should also look out for them and then get the appropriate help. And also know that it's common. 1 in 4 people at any point in their life might have had one mental health problem or the other. It may not be severe enough for that person to get help, but it means that it's that common amongst us. So between the 4 of us,
somebody.
Yeah, and then there's help available. And one major setback is the stigma, and it starts from us. Yes, we'll be talking about it, but we've just finished, and then we've just addressed someone by the same words or by our actions. So we also have to look at addressing the stigma with it to help other people get the needed help.
Okay, and then just like you mentioned, let's rally around people when they have traumatic experiences. Sexual abuse is one experience that a lot of times we forget the psychological aspect of it, and there's help available. Okay, so outside the medical aspects, you should also seek help. an accident, a very traumatic accident, it's important to seek robbery, like you mentioned, it's important to seek help. So if you hear that somebody is going through any of these loss, okay, these are the times to rally around people. These are the pointers, because these are the vulnerable periods. Okay, someone is going to SHS. It's a new experience. Somebody is going to the university. Somebody is relocating. All these are periods of stress that, we should rally around people in this period. Someone's actually marriage, new baby. Yeah, all these are periods.
So you be life in general.
Yeah, it's something new that you have to cope with. Okay, so for some people it's very stressful. And sometimes what is meant to be a period of joy can end up being a stressor for some people. So
wow. Cool. This chat, I think I can go on just listening to the two of you chat for the rest of the evening. But we don't have any more questions, and it looks like we are about done here. I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being so open. Thank you for being very so generous with your knowledge. And for everybody who was able to tune in as well, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for your questions. I hope this session has been as beneficial to you as it has to me. And as you can see, our studio has changed. It was not the plan, but we are rolling with the punches. If you have any space for us and the Lord is knocking on the door of your heart, just let us know. We'll be happy to take it up. Also, if you want to be part of 316 in any way, if you have any topics that you want us to cover, if next month you are tired of seeing my face, you want us to see your face, this is not my show. It's for all of us at Richard. So let's get involved. And before we sign off, I just want us to spend some time in prayer. We've heard a lot. We've learned a lot. We don't want it to be just a conversation. We don't want it to just be think pieces. We don't want it to be just like something so that we can contribute to future conversations. That's, okay, I know this much about mental health, or I know that much about mental health. We want to be able to live our lives happily. We want to be able to uphold our mental health. We want to be able to handle and deal with our responsibilities, in an optimal way. So everything that we've learned today, we just want to pray and commit ourselves into God's hands, that He would continue to be with us. He would sort of consolidate that knowledge in our hearts and in our minds. The Bible says that for lack of knowledge, my people perish. And today we have added to our knowledge. So we just want to thank God that mental health is not going to be something that will bring us down. It's not going to be something that will cause us to perish in any way, because now we have the knowledge. We are equipped to know how we can deal with it, to form the kind of community that it would take, to support each other, to support our friends. We are equipped. We know where the professionals are, and we are bold enough to approach them and seek, the kind of treatment, whatever it is that we need. We want to pray, committing our minds into God's hands. Whatever mindset that we have that would prevent us from seeking help if we need it, or that would keep us from encouraging someone around us who might need help. We want to pray that God would break that mindset in the mighty name of Jesus. Whatever stronghold it is that is rejecting this knowledge, whatever stronghold it is that is working against us upholding our mental health, we reject it, we cast it down in the mighty name of Jesus. We embrace the wisdom that has been imparted unto us today. We declare that we are no longer going to submit to these conditions that may end up crippling our lives, or that would take away from the quality of the life that we are meant to live. The Bible says that He came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. It means that even here on earth, Jesus wants us to have a good life, not just when we transition into the next age. We want to pray and just commit anyone in our lives who we know is going through a situation, whatever it is they may be going through, whether they are in denial, whether they've sought help, whether they are going through treatment, whatever it is, want to pray and reinforce that treatment, reinforce the help in their lives. If they are in denial, want to pray and break that stronghold in their minds that's making them reject their situation or their condition. We just want to pray that the Holy Spirit would encourage each of us and just bring that consciousness to our minds that we don't have to suffer mental health illnesses or mental health issues, that there is help available for it to be managed, that we can still live fruitful, fulfilling lives in the mighty name of Jesus. I want to pray committing ourselves into God's hands. I want to pray that God will make us good friends. God will make us good support systems in the mighty name of Jesus. That when He speaks to us, when He brings somebody in our minds that, oh, you've not seen this person in a long time, why don't you check on them? Or this person wasn't feeling too well, why don't you check on them? Any prompting, because I've realized that God doesn't just speak to us and leave it at that. The Bible says that the seeds that were sown, they became fruitful. They reaped a harvest. So whatever it is that we've learned today, we wanted to reap a harvest. Let's see that kind of community that we've spoken about today. We want to see manifestations of it even moving forward. We want people to be able to look at us as a fellowship, our families, our friends, and know that this is a community, this is a good group of people that I can trust, a group of people that help me uphold my mental health in the mighty name of Jesus. You want to be that friend, you want to be that family member that, somebody who's going through an issue can look up to and just reach out to, and you can be there for that person. Let's thank God. Let's thank Him for answered prayers. Let's thank Him that when He sends His word, it does not return to Him empty. Let's thank Him that His word fulfills whatever purpose for which He sends it. You are wonderful. You are worthy, oh Lord. 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 We give you glory, Lord, as we honor you. We give you glory, Lord, as we honor you. For you are wonderful. You are worthy, oh Lord. You are wonderful. You are worthy, oh Lord. I'm so encouraged today. I think this song is a testimony that we are all about to share, that we're going to see the glory of God in our lives. We're about to see Him being wonderful, being worthy of being the God that we've understood Him to be. I believe that there's going to be so many testimonies that are going to come out of this session. I believe that we're going to see a happier fellowship, a fellowship that's, likes themselves. I'm so confident. I can just see God's hand moving in our lives. I pray, I wish we would just embrace it. I wish wherever you are, we would just embrace it. Because it's going to be glorious, it's going to be wonderful. And we'll give God all the honor and praise. Father, we thank you. We thank you so much. We thank you so much for your presence in our lives. We thank you for your word that has come to us today. We thank you for who you are. Thank you, God, that we have this confidence that we serve a living God, a God who has our interests at heart, a God who will bring us every resource we need to live a victorious life, even here on earth. Father, we give you praise, we give you glory, we give you all the honor and adoration because you deserve it. You are worthy, O Lord. We thank you so much in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, that was powerful. Okay, so that's it for this month's session. We'll see you guys again next month. And yeah, everybody have a good month. Have a good week. Adios, adios. Bye.
3, 2, 1, and cut. Yeah, of course it's there. Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Where is Peter calling?
Seriously.
Has it ended? Can somebody check again? I think we can put something like